Hey everyone. Before we dive into today's stories, I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart. We've hit 1,000 subscribers, and it's beyond anything I could have imagined. I'm honestly so overwhelmed with gratitude. Your support means more than words can express. It's because of each of you that this channel has come this far. Every like, comment, and share has been a part of this journey, and I'm incredibly thankful for it. I'm beyond excited for what's ahead, and I can't wait to keep sharing these chilling stories with all of you. You're not just subscribers, you're part of this incredible community, and I couldn't be more thankful to have you along for the ride. Now, let's jump into today's chilling stories. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 22 now, but this story takes me back to when I was 14 years old, living in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Texas. It's a place known for its sprawling landscapes, wide open spaces, and a strong sense of community. At least, that's what we thought back then. We lived in a modest single-story house on the outskirts of Houston. My parents worked long hours, mom at a hospital and dad in construction. It wasn't uncommon for me to be home alone after school, and I'd grown used to the routine. Texas felt safe. Nothing bad ever seemed to happen in our little corner of the world. That illusion was shattered on an ordinary Tuesday night in October. That evening began like any other. I came home from school, dropped my backpack in the hallway, and found a note from Mom on the kitchen counter. Leftovers in the fridge. Heat them up for dinner. Love you. Dad texted me around 6 to check in, and I reassured him everything was fine. After dinner, I settled into the living room to binge a rerun of my favorite show. It was around 8:30 when I first heard it, a metallic scraping noise. It sounded faint, like something brushing against the side of the house. At first, I dismissed it as the wind. Autumn evenings in Texas could be breezy, and the sound of tree branches swaying wasn't unusual. But then it happened again, louder and more deliberate. A chill crept up my spine. Something about the noise felt wrong. I muted the TV and strained to listen. The sound seemed to be coming from the backyard. I hesitated, my pulse quickening, and walked to the front window. Peeking through the curtains, I noticed a black car parked across the street. It wasn't familiar. Its windows were tinted, and the engine was off, but something about its presence felt out of place. That's when I heard the back door rattle. My stomach dropped. We had an old sliding glass door that led to the backyard. It was temperamental. You had to yank it hard to secure the lock. Panic washed over me as I realized I couldn't remember if I'd locked it. My heart pounded as I tiptoed toward the kitchen. The sound of the door handle jiggling filled the air, each rattle louder than the last. I grabbed the largest knife from the kitchen drawer, my hands trembling as I clutched it to my chest. I wasn't sure what I was planning to do, but having it made me feel slightly less helpless. Creeping closer to the sliding door, I peeked around the corner. My breath hitched. There were 3 men standing on the patio, all dressed in black and wearing ski masks. One held a crowbar, another a long metal pipe, and the third seemed to be fiddling with the lock. They moved with an eerie calmness, as if they had all the time in the world. And then one of them looked up. His eyes locked onto mine through the glass, and I froze. His gaze was empty, devoid of any emotion. He banged on the glass with his crowbar, shouting something muffled. I couldn't hear his words over the pounding of my own heartbeat, but the meaning was clear. They weren't leaving. Adrenaline took over, and I bolted upstairs to my room, slamming and locking the door behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial 911. Whispering into the phone, I told the operator there were intruders trying to break into my house. She stayed on the line, urging me to stay calm and keep quiet. But I couldn't. I was too scared they'd hear me. I hung up and hid in my closet, clutching the knife like it was the only thing standing between me and them. Moments later, I heard the shattering of glass downstairs. They were inside. Their footsteps echoed through the house, slow and deliberate. They spoke to each other in hushed tones, their voices punctuated by the occasional chilling laugh. I held my breath, every creak of the floorboards sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Then I heard one of them start up the stairs. Each step groaned under his weight, the sound getting closer and closer. I clamped a hand over my mouth to muffle my breathing. When he reached my bedroom door, he jiggled the handle. Finding it locked, he banged on the door, the force reverberating through the house. And then, sirens. The wail of police sirens pierced the night, and the man outside my door swore loudly. Footsteps thundered down the stairs as the intruders scrambled to escape. I stayed hidden, too terrified to move, until I heard the officers' voices calling out, announcing their presence. When they found me, I was still huddled in the closet, clutching that knife like a lifeline. It took me several minutes to convince myself it was safe to let go. The intruders were gone by the time the police arrived, leaving behind shattered glass and a lifetime of fear. They were never caught. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow sent me spiraling into panic. My parents installed a new security system and sold the house not long after, but the damage was done. Even now, years later, I can't be home alone without feeling like someone's watching. I double-check every lock, keep my phone fully charged. Those men didn't just break into my house that night. They shattered my sense of safety. My partner David and I were living in a quiet little neighborhood in Texas at the time. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. We'd been renting this small house for about a year. It had a big backyard that David loved to work in, and everything about it just felt normal. That night, we went to bed like any other. It was a Friday, and I remember falling asleep to the sound of the TV in the living room. David always left it on because he said the noise helped him sleep. Around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to this weird creaking sound coming from the back of the house. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe an animal. We had this old screen door in the backyard that rattled sometimes. But then I heard it again, louder this time, like someone was trying to force it open. My stomach dropped. I nudged David awake. He mumbled something about it being nothing and rolled over, but then we both heard it. A loud thud. It wasn't just the door rattling. Someone was trying to get in. David sat up, and I could see his whole demeanor change. He wasn't the kind of guy who got scared easily, but I could tell he was worried. He told me to stay in the bedroom while he went to check it out. I didn't want him to go, but what was I supposed to do? I stayed frozen in bed, listening as he grabbed a baseball bat from under the bed and walked down the hall. The next thing I heard was the sound of glass shattering. I bolted up and ran to the bedroom door, cracking it open just enough to peek out. That's when I saw them. Two guys, both wearing dark clothes, storming into the house through the smashed sliding door in the kitchen. They were yelling at David, telling him to get on the ground. One of them had a crowbar and another had a gun. David was trying to reason with them, saying we didn't have anything worth stealing, but they didn't care. One of them shoved him hard, and he stumbled back against the counter. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen, watching as these men tore apart our house like they owned it. David wasn't the kind of person to back down, though. He swung the bat at the guy with the crowbar, and for a second I thought maybe he'd scared them off. But then the guy with the gun stepped forward and cracked him across the head with the butt of it. David went down hard. I didn't even think. I grabbed my phone and ran into the closet. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial 911. I whispered to the operator what was happening and begged them to send someone fast. She told me to stay hidden and keep quiet, but I could barely hear her over the sound of the men yelling and smashing things in the house. They kept asking David where the money was. We didn't have any money in the house, and I don't think they believed him when he said that. I could hear David groaning, and I knew he was hurt, but I couldn't do anything. I just sat there in the closet, clutching my phone and praying they wouldn't come down the hall. It felt like forever before I heard the faint sound of sirens. One of the guys shouted something, and then they all took off out the back door. I waited until I was sure they were gone before I came out. The house was destroyed. Cabinets were ripped open, drawers dumped on the floor. David was lying on the kitchen floor holding his head. Blood was dripping down his face, but he was alive. The police arrived a few minutes later, but by then, the men were long gone. They took our statements, took pictures, and told us we were lucky it wasn't worse. David had a concussion and a few broken ribs, but he recovered. Physically, at least. Mentally, neither of us have ever really gotten over it. We moved out of that house a few months later. We couldn't stay there, not after what happened. I don't know if those guys were ever caught, and honestly, I doubt they were. It's been years since it happened, but I still think about it every time I hear a strange noise at night. My name's Jake. Back then, I was a 17-year-old high school senior living with my parents in a small town on the outskirts of Houston. It wasn't much, just a modest house at the edge of a neighborhood bordered by thick woods. I remember that October night so clearly. The air was cool for once, a welcome break from the usual Texas heat, and the leaves rattled faintly in the breeze. My parents had gone on a weekend trip to visit family in Dallas, leaving me in charge of the house and our German Shepherd, Ranger. Big, loyal, and protective, Ranger was my shadow, always following me around. That night, I was sprawled out on the couch, flipping between a crime show and my phone. Ranger was at my feet, snoring softly. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. It was around 10 p.m. when Ranger suddenly bolted upright, ears perked, and body tense. Then came the barking, deep, ferocious, like he was ready to fight. My heart skipped a beat. He only barked like that when something was seriously wrong. The sound was coming from the side of the house near the backyard. Our fence had been damaged for weeks, a section leaning awkwardly after a storm. My dad kept saying he'd fix it now, but life had gotten in the way. Now, staring at the darkened backyard, I regretted not pressing him to get it done sooner. I grabbed a flashlight and cracked open the back door. Ranger shoved past me, growling as he charged toward the broken fence. I followed cautiously, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything, just shadows dancing with the wind. But then I noticed it. The fence wasn't just leaning anymore. A section had been forced wide open, jagged wood splintered like it had been pried apart. My stomach turned. My first thought was a deer or some other animal, but Ranger wouldn't stop prowling the yard, his growls low and menacing. Something wasn't right. I called Ranger back inside and locked the door, hands trembling. I tried convincing myself it was nothing, just the wind or some wandering creature, but my nerves wouldn't settle. Ranger wouldn't either. He kept pacing by the back door, occasionally letting out a growl that sent chills down my spine. I turned off the TV and most of the lights, leaving only my bedroom lamp on. If someone or something was out there I didn't want to advertise, I was awake. Ranger and I retreated to my room where I tried to distract myself with my phone, but my ears were tuned to every creak and groan of the house. Sometime around midnight, I must have fallen asleep. I woke up with a jolt, heart racing, unsure of what had stirred me. The house was eerily quiet. Ranger was lying beside me, his ears twitching. Then I heard it, a faint creak from downstairs. I froze, straining to listen. It came again, louder this time. Footsteps. Someone was walking in my house. Ranger growled, low and guttural, his eyes locked on my bedroom door. My hands fumbled under the bed until they closed around the cool metal of my old baseball bat. I crept to the door and cracked it open, peering down the dark hallway. That's when I saw him. A man in dark clothes and a hoodie was in the kitchen, rummaging through drawers. The faint glow from the fridge light illuminated his face just enough to make out a scruffy beard and hollow eyes. My blood ran cold. I silently closed and locked my door, heart pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that there was an intruder in my house. The operator's calm voice was a lifeline as I stayed huddled in the corner with Ranger. She told me to stay quiet and keep the door locked. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours as I listened to the man move through the house. Every crash of a drawer or thud of a footstep made me flinch. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens. Ranger perked up, his tail wagging faintly. The sounds downstairs stopped abruptly. The police arrived quickly, flooding the house with blue and red lights. They found the man hiding in the downstairs bathroom, half stuck in a window he'd tried to climb through. He had a crowbar and a knife on him. Later, they told us he'd been involved in a string of break-ins around the area. I don't like to think about what could have happened if Ranger hadn't been there to warn me. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.